Unstoppable drones?
In the last 24 hours, police say unidentified drones were spotted near Denmark's main military base.
Mysterious drones are shutting down airports across Europe.
Unidentified drones breached Belgian airspace above key military sites for a third consecutive night.
And governments are scrambling for answers.
Drone sightings shut down the NATO country's biggest airport. The Danish Prime Minister was clear, saying there is one main country that poses a threat to Europe's security, and it is Russia.
Are they from Russia or from somewhere else entirely? UK journalist Christopher Sharp of the Liberation Times joins us with the latest. Let's find some answers. Hey everyone, I'm Matt Ford and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. If there's one thing we've learned, it's this. The mainstream media cannot be trusted to tell you the truth when it comes to UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon, what used to be called UFOs, flying saucers. You take your pick, it's all the same thing. And the so-called drone story that's happening all across Europe, no different. So tonight, we are going straight to the source, a journalist across the pond who actually has integrity and is reporting on a topic the mainstream media flat out lies to you about. Our interview with the editor-in-chief of the Liberation Times, Christopher Sharp. Chris, how are you? I see you're enjoying a nice cup of tea. What time is it there in the United Kingdom?
It is 10:25. So yeah, it's a night. I've got the kids to bed, so it's all good, brother. It's all good. Yeah, so just relaxing now. So it's good joining you again. It's been too long since we've done this.
It has been a while. I'd have to go back and look to see, but yeah, it's been a while since you've been on the show, but you've been on quite a few times, and I'm just super happy to have you back. And I can tell you're in some new digs.
Yes, I have now moved out of London. So now got a big house outside of London to raise the family in. So it's fantastic. More space, fresh air. So yeah, it's great. I'm really loving it so far.
Super happy to have you back. Always good to see your face. How are things going at Liberation Times? You've been really putting out some amazing work on the UAP topic.
Yeah, so it's all focusing on value. What value can I provide? I see a lot of people out in the world in general, and they're looking to make a splash. And a lot of the time they use sensationalism or they use rhetoric. But the only thing that can keep you going, keep you relevant, is providing real value, and that takes hard work. You know, it takes a team to get exclusive new information, provide new insights, provide good information where possible, and that's what I really try to do. I've got a good network of people around me. Want to give a shout out to Kyle Warfel, for instance. You know, does excellent work for me, and yeah, it's all about kind of working hard, putting in the hours, practicing your judgment, and having faith in good people who share the same values as you do, just wanting to provide good value to the topic. So yeah, that's what it's all about, really.
Absolutely. And it still amazes me to this day that all of this news about drones, and we're going to talk about drones here in a little bit in what is happening in Europe, but all of this news about the UAP issue, drone incursions over restricted airspace, all of this stuff, and there's literally just kind of like an absence, or these journalists and mainstream media are completely asleep at the wheel. Luckily, we have you at Liberation Times, Ross Coulthard at News Nation, Mark von Rennenkamp does some great work, as does Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp. But really, there aren't that many of you that are covering this topic with the fervor and seriousness that it deserves. Do you think that it is by design the mainstream media is ignoring this, and when they're not ignoring it and they're writing about it, that the a lot of what they put out is just kind of journalistic garbage. Why do you think that is?
I really don't understand it. I mean, if I had access to some of their sources within the Pentagon, the intelligence community, I'd be asking, more questions, a lot better questions than them, actually. I feel that, we've managed to get more insight at Liberation Times than a lot of these big networks and these big publications have, just through, sheer hard work and just kind of a drive just to get the truth out there. We were the ones who reported on the Bass Strait, for instance, in 2019, when you had the drones going over the US warships in the Pacific back in 2019. So we reported that off the back of the hard work of Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, fantastic journalists again, who are actually willing to not swallow what other media publications are saying. They want to go to the sources, the people who are actually there to actually get a feel for what was happening on the ground. We did that as well with the Lakenheath drone incursions of 2024. We got insight from people who were actually on the ground to assess what really was the situation. I came out on a podcast at the time to say it was a national security situation, a real high national security situation in the UK. It was later reported in the Times of London that there were 2 Cobra meetings in the UK government related to the drone incursions over Lakenheath and other facilities over the UK that have not come out publicly yet. So these are real serious incursions. When you got Plant 42 in California, which has skunk works, and it has Northrop Grumman and Boeing, when you have drones go over that area and they have to call a sheriff's helicopter to help deal with the drones, and when they're actually trying to chase after the drones to find out where their origin is, and they lose track of them, I mean, you just kind of like think to yourself, is it really that bad? Or are they just kind of like trying to feed us this narrative? I don't understand how such bases could be so poorly protected. And, also we were able to get the slides from the Langley drone incursions, which happened almost 2 years ago now. Again, a very important base there. And, we were able to find out that the drones, for instance, were more interested in NASA facilities, which were next to Eustis, I think it's Eustis Langley, which is a joint base there. And we were able to confirm that the drone busters failed. Actually, we've got slides confirming detection and jamming measures all failed. And this is supposed to be a lessons learned document, So a year after that, we had Lakenheath, the drones over those, being a US air facility. Okay, so from my understanding, none of the drones have been confirmed to have been shot down there, at least from what I've been told and what's been reported. So were lessons really learned? I'm not so sure. And now we've got the same situation ongoing over Belgium. And the UK military has now been called in to help and provide assistance. Well, what use is that? Because the UK military couldn't take these drones down a year ago. So what makes them so confident they're going to help Belgium now? Especially when you've got a situation when they're closing down Belgium airspace and they're closing down airports and they're flying over bases with US nuclear bombs. If it was Russia, and they wanted to launch a surprise attack, they could easily do so, because at the moment it seems that no one has a grip on this situation.
I want to read some of the recent headlines, and this just really kind of enumerates how prolific this whole drone, I use drones in quotes, this whole drone situation is, and the effect that it is having in Europe. So from September 27th, from, what is this, Reuters, quote, Germany to take steps to defend itself against high threat from drones. October 3rd, from Reuters, Munich Airport reopens after drone sightings halt flights. Le Monde, from Le Monde, October 3rd, Germany and Belgium, latest to report suspicious drone flyovers. October 8th on The Guardian, from The Guardian, Germany draws up law to allow police to shoot down drones. October 4th, AP, Associated Press, Germany's Munich airport reopens after second closure in less than 24 hours due to drones. Jumping here to November 4th, Brussels airport closed after reported sighting of drone from Reuters. November 5th, drone sightings from fresh flight cancellations at Belgium's main airport from the AP. November 6th, from Reuters, drone scare halts traffic at Sweden's second busiest airport. And November 7th, from Associated Press, drone sightings halt flights at major European cargo airports in Belgium. I mean, this is insane, the amount of impact that all of these sort of mysterious drones are having at these airports. How is this playing in the news in the UK and Europe? Is it getting the sort of traction that this deserves?
Not in the UK. I mean, we're hardly paying attention to here. And this is why I say that the government needs to be planning, because it seems that these drone incursions have now expanded, and they're now shutting down critical civilian infrastructure like airports. So if Heathrow Airport or Gatwick Airport, which has happened before with Gatwick, are closed down again to drone incursions, that will be a major story. And I don't think the UK government is in a good position to deal with these things unless someone is willing to take kinetic action. I don't know how far we're going to get with these things. And if people do suspect they're Russian, I think they do need to shoot one of them down. I mean, there must be some circumstances. I think there were over Denmark, when they may have been over water. So why not shoot them down there if they're so afraid of kind of collateral damage from shooting down some of these drones? But, all it takes is shooting down one of these drones. And if they are Russian, if they can prove they're Russian, then it's a major embarrassment to Russia. And then hopefully they'll come to an end then. But I'm not so sure. I do have information, and I have seen evidence from New Jersey, for instance, that some of these drones do have anomalies, and that can't be easily explained. It's so difficult, with UFO versus drones and everything. And, just to give you some examples, Marek and I have been looking at some of the reports, and we've got videos as well of the so-called drones over New Jersey, and we've actually matched them up with flight patterns and flights that were coming in at the same time with the same coordinates, and it looks like some of them may have been mistaken for civilian aircraft. So under that circumstance, you definitely want to make sure what you're shooting down is definitely a drone, I suppose, if you're going to use kinetic action.
But the ones that are shutting down airports, these airports are likely getting shut down not from civilians reporting, hey, I see something over here or whatever. I mean, there's got to be some level of reliable intelligence that these airports are relying on to completely shut down operations there, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. They do have reliable information. It's just that we're not being shown the reliable information or any of the images from Europe at the moment. I know that a few people have, I had this over Copenhagen as well, that once the drones were actually seen, a helicopter was sent out just to kind of like keep track on them. And then people were sending videos and images basically showing the helicopter, saying that I saw one of the drones, but actually what they're seeing is a helicopter. Right. So it's very difficult because when drones are spotted, it's very difficult to kind of untangle them from other traffic that may be up there. Right. Whether in New Jersey, for instance, where you had civilian aircraft up ahead because the airspace wasn't closed there, nor was the airport. I think it was JFK Airport, and then over Copenhagen, where the airport did suspend flights, but you still had a helicopter up there. So it's very, very difficult to kind of like assess and identify what's what from just images alone. But yeah, they do have good information showing that, these things are, in what they say, are drones. But again, we've just had a document released from FBI via Roskiltat, saying that the FBI does view drones to be UAP in some circumstances, potentially. And the other thing I'll throw up there as well is, when it comes to UFOs or UAP, we're not talking about non-human craft or anything like that. We're just showing, we're just dealing with, in terms of the definitions, things that haven't been identified yet, that have potential anomalies. And in many instances, they will actually eventually be identified with prosaic explanations. So it's always worth keeping that in mind when it comes to UFOs and UAP. If you want to talk about kind of like the things that we want to talk about in terms of the special access programs and whatnot, I think then you have to use different definitions. If you want to use non-human craft, you have to be straight. I think eventually this topic is going to have to stop using the term UFO, because it is actually unidentified flying object. It means that you haven't identified it. So if you want to start talking about kind of like non-human craft, I think you have to be explicit if you think it's non-human. And I've said before as well with the drones as well, that some of them do have anomalies. And, you can look back at the history of UFOs, the first ever kinetic action, from my understanding, with a UFO was after World War II, when a French pilot was shooting at balloons. He thought they were balloons, and actually they turned into flying saucers when he started shooting. So we do know that there is pattern behavior with UFOs. Actually, they're able to kind of they're able to camouflage themselves, let's say, to be, well, not camouflage, they're able to kind of like change and morph themselves to be prosaic objects like balloons. So maybe in this instances, they could be, they could just look like drones, and that's kind of like the new balloons are drones, basically, for UFOs.
And I think, and what sort of anomalies are you hearing in terms of them? What is being viewed by people as far as these flying objects? What are some of the anomalies you're hearing about that says, these things may not be regular drones from Russia or whoever? So
Russia does have technology that can stop jamming. I guess like fiber optic cables or something like that. But in those instances, they have to be tethered, and it can only go so far. So with the amount of drone incursions that we're actually seeing all across the continent, to have them tethered, I mean, I don't think that's very plausible. So I don't think it's the Russians, unless it's using technology that we're not aware of. And then I also, I'm aware of, let's say, I think this happened in New Jersey, for instance. You put a drone up to have a look what's going on, have a look at the drones that are flying over, and then the drone starts malfunctioning, and it basically comes down as a result. I'm hearing stories like that happen. Okay. And people really, really are mystified where these things are coming from. They really have no idea, and everything about the experience tells them that it's a drone, but they're like, how come we are not able to find a controller? How come we can't follow them? Why do we not know where they're coming from? Why do we not know where they're going? But look, there are also places within the intelligence community that should have a good idea. Look at the Weapons and Counter-Proliferation Mission Center within the CIA, for instance. That is able to generate products based on information coming from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NRO, NSA. They're getting all this information coming through, and they're getting products as well in terms of their assessments from the US Air Force and other agencies, and they're able to pull that all together. whilst also using their own human intelligence as well, to actually provide to actually identify those. So from my understanding, long before Arrow existed, this place within the CIA was the place basically that people took UFO reports to. And they do the same with anything they can't identify, because, if you're dealing with something suspected to be of a foreign nature, in origin, that's kind of like the CIA's domain. So it does get involved, and it's a very, very interesting office. And from my understanding as well, if it does see something like really strange going very, very fast in the sky or something like that, they're able to contact the contractors as well, like Lockheed Martin and whatnot, saying, look, were you flying anything up there? Because we saw something. So they've got all these resources. So I think everyone's asking, like, the Department of Defense and the militaries, like, what do you know about the origin of these things? Why can't you determine the controllers? But I think, in fact, they should be asking the intelligence agencies, be it, they be in Europe or whether they be in America, because I get the feeling that we're in a Havana syndrome situation again, where they do have evidence showing where they're coming from, but for some reason they don't want to release that information publicly. So there's a trust issue when it comes to this as well, because I think people realize that there's something a lot more mysterious to these incursions, and they don't really buy the explanation. They can't take these things down either. So, and I can see the frustration, especially when they're flying over really sensitive facilities. Something needs to be done. And if jamming didn't work yesterday, why is jamming going to work tomorrow? So they need to think of other ways to, stop these from happening.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, absolutely none of this is these explanations. Something fishy is going on. These various governments, I think, are either just completely clueless, or they know something isn't adding up and they don't want to publicly say it. So, like, a good example. So we have had this Russian-Ukrainian conflict going on for quite some time. There's this account on X called OSINT Defender. And whoever runs this account is freaking amazing, but they post all kinds of stuff. And I have seen tons of posts where they are showing the radar images, or I'm not sure if it's like from Flight Radar 24 or whatever, of when drone attacks are occurring, where they will show hundreds of targets, radar targets of Russian drones heading towards Ukraine, and it's zoomed out, it's over Europe. So you see all of these radar targets of these Russian drones coming to Ukraine, or the other way around. So you've got this huge area of operation that is clearly under military radar surveillance because of this conflict going on. So how can they not know where these things are coming from? It doesn't make any sense. So if you rewind and you go back to 2019, 2020, in the Midwest here in the United States, you had similar, if almost not exact, sort of descriptions of these drones over Colorado, over Kansas, I believe, over Nebraska. We had on the show the former police chief of Ord, Nebraska, Chris Grooms, and I've got like 40 pages of tons and tons of 911 calls, all the way back from 2019, of these drones as large as pickup trucks, 40 to 50 of them, swarming cities that are only the size of like 3,000 people. And all the way back then, when all of this was happening, 2019 and 2020, the FBI was involved, the Department of Homeland Security was involved, the Pentagon was involved. So they saw all of this. But you have the White House, particularly with what was going on in New Jersey last year and the year before, who are saying, oh, these are all FAA-approved drones, et cetera. And then you also will hear from some people that, the Pentagon wasn't able to collect much intelligence on the drones in 2019, 2020, or in New Jersey, because all of our sensors, American space sensors, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance sensors, are actually not aimed at the U.S. homeland. They're aimed over at areas are adversaries, etc. Certainly, a lot are aimed towards the Russian-Ukrainian area. So it is not adding up the excuses, because clearly the Department of War, the CIA, had plenty of time since 2019, 2020 to study these drones that they mysteriously have never tried to shoot down, as far as we are aware. So now fast forward to 2025, we are seeing the exact same thing that was happening over the American Midwest in 2019, 2020. We're having it happen in 2025, and they don't seem to have answers, and they're not shooting them down. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And if they are going to feed this excuse that they suspect it's Russia, well, then we may as well get on a footing that Israel are on. They shoot down drones all the time if they feel that it's from an adversary. So
yeah,
we need to get on that footing if we do expect it's Russia. So, let's call their bluff if they think it's Russia. The other thing that I am interested in is Matthew Littleberger. From my understanding, he wasn't a crazy dude. He was someone who was a decorated Green Beret, very good at what he did. And, he decided to blow his car up outside the Trump Hotel at the beginning of this year. And he claims that he had knowledge, because he was working with drones as well at the time. He had knowledge that the drones flying over New Jersey and other places were actually sophisticated Chinese drones that were using a kind of type of gravitic propulsion, something I find quite interesting. And he was saying that America and Chinese are the only ones who have this technology, and it's basically checkmate, that they could fly one of these things over the White House and basically with an unlimited payload, and no one could do anything about it. Look, if you had that kind of situation, I'm trying to think out of the box now.
Sure.
Well, you wouldn't want to shoot it if it's got some very, very high energy propulsion that could be nuclear. So you wouldn't want to do it under that circumstances, I suppose, and it would be very, very difficult. You would be able to jam it,
right?
Because it would operate like a drone. And then we've got Matthew Brown, who basically had written or prepared a document showing that there are instances where there were Russian intelligence ships in the Atlantic and in the Pacific rendezvousing seemingly with triangular hovering craft above them. So does Russia have this kind of technology as well? If they do, why are they not using it over the Ukraine, for instance? Or is it just kind of a situation where it was actually you wouldn't want to use it over Ukraine, that you're going to wait until you get into a major conflict, which was more of a life and death situation before giving away your hand? But then again, Ross has reported a story with an eyewitness showing that there were witnesses to a hovering triangular craft over the Ukraine territory during the war as well. So it's a tough one. You start thinking, actually, is this something which is sophisticated technology? Is it like a cat and mouse kind of game, kind of like Havana syndrome, that by kind of admitting that the Chinese have really real high tech technology, or the Russians, that then they would have to kind of give away their hand, saying that we've got this technology as well, despite the fact they might want to protect this. So I don't know, you always have to look into the classified domain as well, because we're having an unclassified conversation with this. We've got no data being fed into us from the NGA. We're not aware of all the special access programs, the DARPA programs, or controlled access programs. We have no knowledge of those. So all we can do is basically speculate. And all I can say is that, I've covered these drone events pretty extensively, and I've still got more questions. Actually, I've got more questions now than I do answers. It's a real tough one to answer, sadly. I would point out one thing as well, that the Belgian defense minister, I think he was mentioning that they were trying to jam these things, but they kept on changing frequencies. So if that's the case, then that's suggesting actually we're not dealing with anything too exotic, but it's actually just some very, very sophisticated actors who are able to just kind of like outsmart the best counter drone jamming technology there is. So who knows? It's a really tough one. There are others that will speculate that perhaps these are AI controlled, they're autonomous. It could be something like that potentially as well. So it could be a lot of things that we could put on the table, but for some reason, I don't think we're getting all the answers, like you said, despite a plethora of information and sensors being available.
Hey folks, over half of our viewers watching right now are not subscribers. So please help us grow our show by becoming a subscriber to our channel and hit the little notification bell so you will always be up to date on our latest shows. We are also on all the major social media platforms. You can find us on X at Good Trouble Show and everywhere else at The Good Trouble Show. You can also find us wherever you enjoy your podcasts. Search for The Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford. And if you would like to become a supporter of The Good Trouble Show, please join us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. Your support allows us to keep bringing you great shows like today's. With that out of the way, let's get back to our interview with Christopher Sharp of the Liberation Times. The other thing that kind of comes to my mind as well is motivation. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're China or you're Russia and you've developed these drones that cannot be easily, jammed or not jammed at all. And this represents, let's say, just like breakthrough technology on their part. Why would, if you're China or Russia, and let's say that, you've only got like, I don't know, a fleet of 50 of them or something like that. Why would you risk this incredible weapon or surveillance platform or whatever you want to call it? Why would you risk this stuff? Why would you risk flying it over an adversary's territory, doing it days on end? So let's say it's like one thing if you fly this thing in for one day, you disrupt an airport, and then you fly back and you don't do anything else. And let's say that you wait a year and then you come back. Because the thing you don't want to do is the first night it's going to be a surprise that these things are out there, and you're shutting down your airport or your military base or whatever, and then they go away and you have no idea when they're going to come back again. So you can't really prepare. But when these things are showing up at military bases like Langley Air Force Base, which I think was like 20 days or something like that, you know that they're going to show up. You know that they're going to show up when the sun sets or an hour after sunset or whatever. Your military then has time to prepare defensive measures and offensive measures, or to set up, signals intelligence. It just like, if you're Russia or you're China, I'd be like, okay, why would I go and send these things over, which would give my adversary, America or a country in Europe, time to collect signals intelligence, time to collect emissions intelligence, time to collect visual intelligence? You're basically taking what it might be your crown jewel in your back pocket, and you're sticking it out there days on end for your adversary to collect information on. And on top of that, you're also giving them the opportunity to be prepared to have the kinetic means of bringing these things down. Like, to me, it just doesn't add up. And then also going back to like what happened in Nebraska, these small towns of like 3,000-4,000 people, why would Russia or China send these things there for days on end? And then the government does nothing about it. It's just, something's fishy. And I can't quite put my finger on it. And again, going back to the kinetic part, I totally understand you don't want to shoot these things down over an airport, which of course is going to be surrounded by civilian population, et cetera. But as you pointed out earlier, I guess these things were also over the water. Why they're not shooting them down? My personal opinion is that the U.S. government has no idea what these things are. my personal opinion is they think that they may be from out there, not from Earth. And therefore, they're maybe telling their allies, look, we don't know what these things are. We don't know their capabilities. We don't know their intent. So we recommend to whoever in Europe, don't shoot at them because we don't know what they're going to do. Am I crazy to be going down that road?
It could be, yeah. I think everything has to be on the table. Like if it was Russia or China, why would they have their lights on at night? As if to kind of like say, here I am, come and shoot me. Why would they do that? It just seems like really strange behavior. If we are dealing with a higher form of intelligence, of course they're going to try tricks. They know how to manipulate us. They know how to mess with us, basically, to keep us guessing and keep us on our feet. So, we had mystery air balloons, I believe, in the early 1900s. And then we had balloons, just normal balloons around the World War II era. And then we have drones now. Is this just kind of like a new disguise for UAP? I'm not sure. I think it's that they know that we can see a lot more now. With cameras are more ubiquitous. We've got camera on our mobiles, for instance. So they're not going to show up perhaps like they were in the 1950s with their being flying saucers then that you could just capture and have definitive proof or whatever. So perhaps this is just their newest disguise. That they're keeping us on our feet. I mean, that could be a possibility. But I mean, from my understanding, this might just be me just not remembering the instances very well. But from my understanding, I don't recall any of the 5 observables kind of being present. But please, anyone can correct me on that. So we haven't seen things like instantaneous acceleration and whatnot when it comes to these drones either. So it's interesting, and it does just like keep this vagueness about it. It just always keeps you guessing. I remember there was a famous video over Cornwall in southwest England about five years ago now. And it was actually taken over a bit of water where I usually go on holiday over a beach. And you see the object like go like this, go like this, go like this, then go up like that. It was caught on a webcam. And I remember that because I think I was there like 2 days afterwards, something like that, which is like really strange timing, to be in Cornwall. I didn't even know that happened at the time. And then like a year later, I'm there with my dad and my son and my brother, and we're kind of like talking about the incident. And I think we're at a pub, and I nip up to the bar to get a drink. And then when I get back, my dad, my brother, and my son are all looking at the sky, and there's like this thing hovering above. And my dad at first, as he saw it coming in, he thought it was kind of like a stealth bomber or something like that because it was triangular. And then it just stopped above, and I got an image of it, and it's kind of like it's flashing, kind of like a drone, and it's just hovering, just like oddly, just straight above us, and then it just went whizzing off. Not instantaneously like a UFO, but kind of like very, very fast. And it was like nighttime as well, and it had its lights on, but it always keeps you guessing, because in my mind, I'm always thinking, well, obviously that's a drone. What else could it be, especially of this beautiful stretch of Cornwall. Right. This is the problem, you're kind of like, am I going mad? Is this just like real? Am I, do I know every drone off by hand? This is the problem, because there are drone experts who know every type of drones that could probably go up to me in that instance to actually say, it was this type of model. This is this kind of drone. This was the model number, blah, blah, blah. But then again, when we're talking about these drones over military bases, they've got equipment that could potentially tell you the model of drone it is, give you coordinates if there's a user, because this technology is used every day on Formula Ones or protecting important events. There are like counter drone private companies that do this on a day in, day out basis, So yeah, it's one of these subjects, that just drives you mad after a while. And I'm just keen just to hoover up as much information as I can about it because it's a big mystery.
Are you hearing from officials or politicians in Europe? Are they even going into the sort of public statements saying, these could be Russia or they could be something else? In other words, sort of alluding that these could be some form of non-human intelligence. Are they crossing that Rubicon, so to speak?
No, they're not. There seems a big obsession saying we suspect it's Russia, and then you get kind of like I think it was one of the chiefs of the MOD come out on the BBC earlier to say, oh, both us and Belgium suspect it's Russia or something like that, or that they didn't know what it was, or that they had suspicions, but there's no clear evidence to say it's Russia. They don't have any evidence to say it's Russia, from my understanding. So all they can say is we suspect it's Russia. They don't know it's Russia. They thought the drones in 2019 harassing the US warships, they thought they were coming from the Bass Strait and they thought they were Chinese. However, people had their eyes on that ship throughout the whole incident when these things were occurring, and no one ever saw them fly off the Bass Strait. And from my understanding, that ship was also searched by the FBI and they found nothing. And again, we saw the same thing. The French were kind of like, yes, we think these things are from Russia, because remember in early October, they were occurring over Denmark and they're occurring over France as well. And the French thought that they would search this ship, which was thought to be a Russian Shadow Fleet ship, and they're going to find these drones. And today there's been no confirmation they found anything, and the ship was allowed to sail on. So I think they want to say it's Russia, but, as I like to say time and time again, the government doesn't run the government. And I think that a lot of intelligence a lot of intelligence may be kept from leaders of countries. Yeah. So it makes you question democracy. Even in the UK now, there's a new defense kind of organization, which is joint intelligence within the Cabinet Office. And that's ultra secretive. And we're not so certain that the Prime Minister or anyone from 10 Downing Street is actually invited to those meetings. It just looks like there's layers upon layers of bureaucracy. Yeah. And it's so difficult for any one person to have their eyes and ears on what's happening in the intelligence world. These politicians that, are coming out with these statements, like in the UK, for instance, the defense minister, they've got to be a defense minister. So they've got to be all over it in terms of what's going on. They're never going to have time to do all that because, the Ministry of Defense has thousands of employees. It's run by a permanent secretary who actually does all the real work. And, the defense secretary and, about 3 or 4 defense ministers who support him or her, they're never going to be able to have a good overview of what's going on. And also, in addition to that, they've got to be members of parliament as well, serving their constituents. And they've got to attend this event. They've got to attend that event. So they're never going to, it's just kind of like one of the limitations of democracy in our democratic systems, that it's very, very difficult for a few hundred people from elected government to actually come in and run the government and actually have full oversight of what's going on. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. So I'm not even sure that, defense ministers have the whole picture, right. Especially when a lot of the most sophisticated sensors are from the US. They may not be shared with those countries.
Yeah, I think so. So really it's sort of like the deep state is not only here in the U.S., but it exists in other forms elsewhere. And we know we have heard this time and time again, at least in the United States, that the UAP issue, that there are presidents that are not told about this, that are not fully read in. Maybe some are partially read in. So if you think about a subject so big as that not being shared with American presidents, there's no reason to think that that same sort of security infrastructure doesn't exist elsewhere.
Yeah. So firstly, taking you back to the White House perspective, like I've said before, the government doesn't run the government. The White House doesn't run the White House. From my understanding, and I think you've heard this before, a lot of the special access programs that are related to UAP are actually within the White House itself, within the National Security Council. And there are other offices as well overseeing UAP programs, let's say. Look, we got Gary Nolan basically saying, I think someone threatened him. I think it was a White House official. And then we got some testimony from Mark Andreessen, who was basically saying that someone from the White House was saying to him that they classified nuclear technology or something along those lines, and we could do the same thing with AI as well. So I think there are a few places you could look within the White House that actually is running really, really strange operations. And I think, if you are Truman or Eisenhower and you were there when his cover-up first took place, you want to have some kind of oversight within the White House. Of what was going on, but obviously it seems that other presidents were not briefed.
I recently had Chris Grooms provide a briefing to a United States Senator's National Security Advisor, and I was on this call, and Chris Grooms really went through exactly, and again, he was the former police chief for Ord, Nebraska, and he was going through all of the various 911 calls he was receiving. And for instance, there were reports from cattle ranchers of these drones or UAP. And what was interesting is during 2019, 2020, they were never able to see a structure, like a physical structure, just points of light that gave the impression that the structure was as large as a pickup truck. But he was telling this senator's national security staffer that a lot of the reports he was receiving were of these things shining bright white spotlights at cattle, and the cattle would run. And of course, the ranchers were upset because they would end up having to spend the rest of the night trying to recover their cattle. So they're all off on their ATVs and whatnot, trying to get the cattle back. Luckily, no one was hurt or anything like that. But another thing he told the senator staffer was that there were multiple reports of these things shining powerful blue spotlights on these ranch houses. And, so it's like weird stuff like that just didn't add up. He also related another report. There was one of the sheriff of that county. They were all out there chasing these things. And they were all in their pickup trucks or their police pickup trucks chasing these quote unquote drones. The sheriff of the county goes up to this intersection and there's this large drone or whatever you want to call it, the size of a pickup truck. And the way the sheriff described this incident to Chris Grooms, he gets out of his pickup truck and he said it was this spotlight that lit up the whole area brighter than like what he would see in daylight. So it was just really bizarre stuff. Chris Grooms himself came to this intersection and he said that again, one of these drones or whatever, UAP, was like at this part of his field of vision. And he said he blinked an eye and the thing literally went over to here. So he did in that instance observe instantaneous acceleration, but by and large, the reports of these things, they were moving around, at least from a speed perspective, like prosaic drones, but they were still doing things that drones normally don't do. And again, this is going all the way back to 2019, 2020. So in that county, the 911 calls were so prolific that the sheriff of the county got the FBI involved, as I mentioned, the Department of Homeland Security. They called the Pentagon, of course, and they all said, "Oh, this is," Pentagon was saying these weren't ours and whatnot. And all of a sudden, it was like the line went dead. The FBI, DHS, and whatnot just disappeared. It was like, so after the incident stopped, and it was kind of the same time frame where all this like cranked up over a 3-4 week period, and then boom, just came to a screeching halt and it all stopped. So did the response from the federal government, which again, just you have to wonder, like, well, why? Why would there be no follow-up? So you've got the sheriff of a large county in Nebraska reaching out to the feds to say, hey, what's going on? And then after the activity dies down, the feds and everybody, they just disappear. In the news lately, this incredible documentary that is coming out from Dan Farah. It's called The Age of Disclosure. And this is coming out on November 21st in select theaters and also, I think, on Amazon Prime. But this documentary, it is just apparently off the charts. What are you hearing in terms of who's on there and what they are saying?
I've been hearing that it's very, very compelling, and it's going to affect a lot of people, especially those who've been on the fence on the UAP topic. And James Clapper is he's a heavyweight name. I remember speaking to one of my OD&I contacts about what James Clapper has said in the movie. I won't tell anyone, don't want to ruin it for anyone. And they were like, what? James Clapper said that? Like, because his name like carries... Yeah, because his name carries a lot of weight in the intelligence circles, and they were very, very surprised. And I've actually got a response from the U.S. Air Force on something that he said, which I'm going to wait until the movie's released. But yeah, it's certainly interesting. I think it's going to be, and I'm hoping as well that going to be timed well, and it's going to be orchestrated with other things that are going to come out. That's my hope. Because you got the Secretary of State saying this stuff, who is also the National Security Advisor chairing the National Security Council, and from understanding is the acting head of NARA as well, so the National Archive. So come on, like, after this movie, if no one's going to ask him any questions about this, I mean, that is just such stupid journalism if no one's going to ask him these questions after this documentary/movie. And such is the compelling testimony in this movie. The White House, I think that's really, really need to act. I mean, I think we've seen over the last year or so, or last 2 years, that steam has run out in Congress for whatever reason. Congress doesn't want to go any further in terms of getting UAP legislation over the line. So I think if there is going to be action, our best hope now is the executive branch, really. And we're hoping that some people in the White House are actually going to start doing stuff to improve transparency. So I think that is actually where our hope lays at the moment, because, if the UAPDA does fail again for yet another year, okay, then we're going to have to wait another year, and we still don't know if it's going to go through. And look, if it was a priority from the White House to get the UAPDA through, it would have gone through the National Defense Authorization Act. That's not been the case. Now, is that because the White House has something else up his sleeve? I don't know. But I think pressure will rise on action to be taken following the release on this of this movie, definitely, because you've got some really high-ranking officials actually coming out about this. So I really, really do hope that action is taken, because what we're dealing with, like, even what you're describing in terms of what Chris Grooms is saying, it's so strange, and it does seem that they are just messing with us, and they're just using every technique possible to kind of like disguise themselves. And one thing that I'll add as well is that I think it was Dark Journalist, obviously he's a controversial figure, he had said something, I few weeks ago that I'd heard about people working on the reverse engineering programs. They enter the craft, these UAPs, and all of a sudden, after a few minutes being there, they start seeing dead relatives, and
Wow.
spooky stuff starts to happen. And from my understanding, that there may be some truth in that, is that,
Wow.
there are kind of like mechanisms that like mess with your consciousness basically to keep you away from them. That's something I'm interested in exploring further. But
For
it's just
sure.
kind of like, yeah, like what we're dealing with. It's just like really weird stuff, when you do get down into it. It's strange and it's uncomfortable. And when you do learn certain stuff, you think, well, actually, maybe they have a point in terms of not wanting to release this because it could be quite disturbing. But yeah, that's what I wanted
Yeah.
to say. Sorry.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, when when I had orbs appear above my home, there was, as I've spoken about on the show, it was like a 4 to 6 month period of all manner of weird paranormal stuff that happened in our home, and it again, it was around 4 to 6 months later. It just boom came to a complete stop. But even last night, sitting outside, and the orbs appeared above my home. I say orbs; it's always been one, but it'll appear, be there for a second and a half, 2 seconds, and then return 30 minutes later. But it is just such bizarre stuff. But I want to get back to like the whole fuckery thing. So I alluded to that with Dan Farah's film, and what I mean by that is, you had tweeted, I think it was a couple of days ago, quote, "On IMDb, there appears to be an effort by some to rate Age of Disclosure a 1 out of 10. This despite the fact it hasn't been released yet. Perhaps there will be a counter effort." And at the time when you released that tweet, I took a look at it, and there were 31 ratings of a rating of 1, which accounted to 14% of the total score. Now, prior to that, I met Dan Farah at the after party at Real Time with Bill Maher, and spent a good probably 15, 20 minutes speaking with him. And he had alluded to sort of fuckery going on that has occurred time and time again to sort of like put up roadblocks for him releasing the film. And it certainly seems that the sort of forces, dark forces, or whatever you want to call them, are doing what they can to kind of poison the well so his film isn't successful. Do you think that tracks? Would that surprise you that the deep state or whoever you want to call it that is dealing with the UAP issue would go to lengths as far as like trying to rate his film with 1 star so people won't go see it?
It's on the table. I think the probability is that it's just skeptics or trolls just messing around. I mean, that's where I always go first. But obviously, being involved in this topic and being through all the things that we've been through, one always must have that on the table. And it's really dispiriting when that stuff happens. The movie hasn't even been released yet, so how could you possibly do that? We all know the hard work that Dan and Lou and others have put into this movie. It was a big deal getting all those people to speak on cameras. It's not easy to do that. And I don't want anyone giving it a bad rating or a good rating. I just want people to wait until the movie's released, and then
Exactly.
But I think, this will blow away. I think what will happen is like once the movie's released, everyone's going to see how amazing it is, and it's automatically can get like thousands of very good reviews that will counteract any of the bad kind of reviews that are out there at the moment. And yeah, that's kind of like my position basically. And I thought it was just like useful just to flag that up basically on social media. So yeah, but my position is that, I don't think anyone, good or bad, should be about rating a movie until you've seen it. Obviously I want it to do well. But I think, people just need to wait until it's being released, and the movie's going to shine through its own merits, because Dan and the others involved have done a fantastic job.
Absolutely. And I think too, we were talking earlier about, the press, the mainstream media, and their kind of lack of really reporting on this thing in a truthful way. And what I mean by truthful, like if you go back, and this also sort of touches on the UAP Disclosure Act, the article that came out from Joel Shechtman and Aruna Viswanathan on the Wall Street Journal about the UAP issue. And they spent a good amount of time talking about the nuclear incident that happened with Robert Salas. I mean, you read that article. It was so poorly researched, if you want to even call it research. It was just journalistic malpractice what Joel Shechtman and Aruna Viswanathan did at the Wall Street Journal. The facts were off. It was clearly a misleading story. When I interviewed Bob Salas, who is, as many of you may know, a retired nuclear launch control officer who had UAP come in the late 60s and shut down 10 of his nuclear missiles, this story that came out from the Wall Street Journal was just such garbage, and just it could have been written by a high school freshman journalism student. But you look at it and you go, how can these two journalists do such a horrible, incompetent job? Why, if they're really that bad journalists, why are they working for the Wall Street Journal? Which says to me that the Wall Street Journal probably said to them, hey, you need to go write this, and you need to write it a certain way. And I've heard Ross Coulthart talk about how the mainstream media is really derelict in their duties in terms of covering the UAP topic at all, let alone when they do cover it, covering it in a truthful manner. So I think the proof in the pudding, as far as whether there's fuckery going on in the mainstream media, which I am 100% convinced there is, will be how the mainstream media covers this film, how they react to Dan Farah's film, The Age of Disclosure, and how they talk about, if they do write about it, I certainly hope they will, how they react to talking about all of the different people in the film, like Marco Rubio and the others that are in there that are saying there is a there there, that there are things that we do not know where they are from that are hovering above our nuclear missile bases. I think that will be the biggest tell as far as whether the mainstream media is in bed with the Pentagon or the Department of War. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what you'll see is you'll see film reviewers possibly give it really good ratings. It's a great movie, but then, when the defense reporters and the intelligence community reporters start reporting on it, you may see a different spin on it then. And I think they're compromised. A lot of these reporters are. It's like a big dance happening. Okay, don't report on this topic or give this a bad spin. I'll give you this story instead, this exclusive. I think a lot of that happens, and people don't trust mainstream media anymore. And these big publications and networks with their embedded reporters within the Pentagon and in Washington, you can easily be misled, basically, to toe the party line. And when information is leaked, it's kind of like a controlled leak, which suits the agenda of the intelligence community or the Pentagon. So, I mean, they're kind of just like sheep, basically. They just take the Pentagon line or the intelligence community line. It's not like Watergate scandal or anything like that when they're actually talking to, people blowing the whistle or MK Ultra. Journalists don't tend to do that anymore, despite the US government lying to them over and over again. Apparently the Pentagon and the intelligence community are just seen as good sources and trusted more than the whistleblowers these days. So it feels like journalism's really gone backwards, Yeah. And I think people just trust independent journalists more now. Like me, for example, I just started this up just randomly one day from my son's bedroom. I didn't expect anything to come from it. Yeah, I didn't expect anything to come from it. I didn't really know that world so much. And here I am today, I haven't been kind of like corrupted by that world, and I just live a normal life, which and I think people prefer those kinds of voices who are just going to put in the groundwork, and they're community funded. People kind of like will do that because I've got a few patrons, and I'm really thankful to my supporters, and I'm not able to like earn a living from this, but it's enough to keep me going, and
Yeah.
I feel that my readers are just kind of like, and my patrons are just like the everyday kind of like UAP advocate. They've had experiences and they just want the truth. These are normal people, and I've got to do my job for them. I've got to provide them with good information. That is my job. I don't get a paycheck every month from a publication that may have, a big billionaire funding them and stuff like that. And it doesn't matter if you print a truthful story or not, or if you've got an agenda or anything like that. I'm very, very clear that I am a pro-transparency publication. That doesn't mean I'm going to lie to my readers. There's been occasions where I've actually had to update stories when the information changes. So I'm always trying to provide truthful information, but ultimately I am accountable. My audience holds me accountable, and I feel a big responsibility for, people who've had experiences and who are interested in getting transparency. And that's who I do my job for, and I see that as a big responsibility for myself. And I just feel that the Wall Street Journal was just, I think the least you expect from a mainstream publication, especially when they've been talking to other sources as well from both sides of the story, is to report both sides of the story. But they didn't do that. And it was easily debunkable. It was really embarrassing after the story was released because it just smelt of disinformation. I think I did an article about that as well, about how the story mimicked kind of like Russian disinformation seen before. And the journalists just should have updated the story or apologized, because it was clearly misinformation. And it seems as well that despite Kirkpatrick, the former director of Arrow, and Tim Phillips, the former deputy director of Arrow, no longer working for the Arrow, it did seem that they were coordinating it with the Pentagon as well, because they managed to get kind of like corroborating quotations from Susan Goff, the spokesperson for Arrow, which kind of like supported the whole kind of agenda of Kirkpatrick and Phillips and what they wanted to possibly get from the article. Yeah, Susan Goff gave a quotation to the journalist, basically, which supported the whole narrative.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you're kind of like thinking to yourself, is this kind of like orchestrated? Are they still working together? And also, if I was John Kozlowski and I wanted to kind of like turn a leaf, from the old era of Arrow, would I be so happy that Sue Goff was kind of like giving those kinds of quotes? Right. So that's the tough part,
Yeah, well, and for those of you at home that don't know who Susan Goff is, she is the Pentagon Public Affairs Officer, or it's called the Department of War now. But this lady, any information, public information regarding the UAP issue from any branch of government, which this never happens, ever, ever, ever. But in this case, anything related to, from a public relations point of view, related to UAP, UFOs, all go through her. Every single one of it. What I've been told by friends in the Pentagon and in the intelligence community is that does not ever happen. But for some reason it is. But I did not know that. That's very interesting about the coordination between, or apparent coordination between the Wall Street Journal and the former director and deputy director of the Pentagon's UFO program, Arrow. Wow, I didn't know that. That is news to me. I did not catch that. But sounds like fuckery to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was really just disappointing, and I just tried to keep my journalism away from that kind of thing. I'm happy to admit that I don't have answers when journalists just jump into the UAP topic and pretend that they just solved it all in one article, and all these mysteries that people have been investigating for decades. it just reeks of BS.
It totally does. Well, all I can say is for everyone here watching this show that loves democracy as much as I do, we are incredibly, incredibly fortunate, Chris Sharp, to have you out there doing journalistic work with pure integrity, covering this topic that thousands of reporters should be covering, and you're doing it in a truthful way, and you're doing it for all the right reasons. And we are super fortunate to have people like yourself doing what you're doing at the Liberation Times. For the folks at home watching this that have not followed the Liberation Times, and this is your publication, how can folks at home find it? And better yet, how can they financially support your work?
Yeah, no, of course. So the website is www.liberationtimes.com. And you can also follow Liberation Times on Twitter as well. Or they can follow me on Twitter, which is it's Chris UK Sharp, SHARP, which is the handle. And yeah, like if anyone wants to be a patron, that's fantastic as well. The patron link is at the bottom of every article. And yeah, we have a really, really great community there, and I'm always providing updates and stuff. And yeah, and people within the community are just having all their conversations as well between themselves and sharing information. And it's great to see the community thrive like that within the patrons. So
Sure.
yeah, it really does keep me going. I've got like 2 jobs. I do this and I do a comms job as well. So yeah, it really does mean the world to me. All my patrons just mean the world to me. They just really do keep me going. Without them, I would not be able to do what I do because I'm fully independent. So just thank you for everyone who has supported me.
Awesome. Well, folks at home, again, if you're not following the Liberation Times, you are missing out. And I encourage all of you, like, anything in life, nothing is free. Costs money to put food on the table. And when you're covering this topic as a journalist, it takes a huge amount of time and effort away from other things in order to provide the quality content and journalism that you're doing, Chris, at Liberation Times. So, but anyway, hey man, I'm super glad you dropped by to come fill us in on the drones and speak about these other things. Super happy to have you. Again, congratulations on the new home. And yeah, look forward to having you back on the show. And hopefully I'll make a trip out to the UK and we can hang out and talk UAP.
Thank you so much, my friend. It means the world to me. Thank you for having me on your show, and thank you to your audience as well. Thank you.